All right, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today, I have Chief Wurth from Shorewood PD in Wisconsin. She started her career in 1992 and was the first female chief in the North Shore. She prides herself on normalizing discussions about mental health and physical fitness and how they play a role in individual growth, team growth, service to the community, and a long and healthy retirement. She retired from her previous agency in 2020 and then was hired as chief of police in 2022. She's been married to her partner for 25 years, which is something to be really proud of. Holds a master's degree in public administration, is a graduate of the FBI National Academy, and has a graduate certificate in trauma-informed care. You guys, I have been looking forward to this conversation for a really long time. So welcome to the show, Chief Wurth. Thank you so much for being here today.
Paige, thank you so much. Really, it's my honor. I'm really happy to be here and have this conversation.
I am as well. And, our first conversation offline, I was like, yes, I was so excited. I'm like, I cannot wait to share all of this with our listeners. And I was going through, kind of my notes, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you again. And there were a few things that I didn't share in your bio, but I wanted to talk to you about it. And I was hoping that you could give us a little bit of background, into the last, I'm going to do quick math, the last 30 years,
30,
33,
32.
32.
Yeah, 32.
Oh, math wasn't my strong point, but the last 32
Mine
years.
neither.
You're like, I don't want to do the math either. Did
It's
you?
why I'm a cop.
Yeah. Did you always know that you wanted to be in policing?
No, not at all. In fact, I never wanted to go into policing. I come from a family of service. My brother, my father in the military. I have lots of extended family, all in military service. I have two aunts that were in law enforcement, but my life took a different path. And as a youngster, I didn't always make the best decisions. I didn't always do the best things, and I really, at a young age, rebelled against authority. And so I really did not want to be in law enforcement or any service industry where I was going to be told what to do, because that just was not. I I'm not a I didn't want to be told what to do,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And so when I went to university, I went into schooling, played sports all throughout high school and university. And so when I went to an undergrad 2 year JUCO college, junior college. And then when I went to university, I thought that I wanted to study psychology, because I thought, there's abnormal psychology. I'm like, there's something not right in my brain, right? So I'm like, I want to understand why. And so I went to school for psychology and a minor in women's studies. And I was just joking, like, math is not my forte, right? So, which, much to the chagrin of my mother, who's an accountant or was an accountant. So I had to take a statistics class, and my brain just doesn't work in numbers. And I'm like, well, I guess that's off the table. And so I decided, well, like, what else can I do? And I ended up dropping out of university, sort of driftless in my young adulthood. And then I was playing football, and I had a number of friends who were firefighters up here in the Milwaukee area. And they're like, yeah, we dare you to take the law enforcement test in Milwaukee. And I'm like, well, I'm going to take that dare, and I'll show you guys. So I applied. 8 months later, I got hired. And I'll tell you what, it was the best decision I ever made. It was the best challenge I ever accepted. And because I can't not see my life have taken another path. This is truly who I am, what I'm passionate about, what I absolutely love to do. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me.
I love that story. And I can actually relate to a lot of what you said of being a little rebellious. I was the same when I went to college. I was like, I don't want to take any classes that don't interest me. So I just didn't even take math or anything. I took psychology, sociology, philosophy, just all the social sciences. I was super interested in that. And then I too dropped out and I ran away to become a professional skydiver. So it was very like similar of like, I'm just going to do, these crazy things. And, if you would have asked me, back then, if I would be doing what I do today, I would have been like, no way. But I love that story of someone almost daring you, like, bet you can't. And you're like, bet you I can. And now 30 plus years later, you're chief of police. I think that's an incredible
Yeah,
story. Uh,
thank you.
you said to me that policing was a different time for women when you started. Can you share a little bit about your experience of what that looked like entering into the career?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I being in sports and stuff, I never, and I grew up. My family was largely supportive of my athletics, and so I never grew up thinking that I couldn't do something
Mm.
ever. Like, I was supported in whatever I wanted to explore, um, and I have a twin brother, right? So it's funny because our what you think of stereotypically male or female, like my brother loved to cook. So he spent so much time in the kitchen with my mother learning how to cook, and he's a fantastic cook. I, on the other hand, loved athletics and being outside and rough and tumble and whatever. And so I spent a lot of time outside with my father, just throwing the ball or playing basketball or riding bikes or running or whatever. So we didn't grow up with those traditional, you can do this, but you can't do that kind of thing. And so in that way, I felt very supported. So when I entered law enforcement, it never crossed my mind. And maybe it's a bit of naivety, right? That I couldn't do something like I couldn't do this job or that I wasn't going to be welcomed into a profession where I saw value in women in places spaces that women belong.
Mhm.
Um, but it was 1992 and um, uh, there were a lot of strong feelings about women in law enforcement. And sadly, I'd like to say that things have changed, and some things have, but there's still some disregard for women or people who are different in this profession. And I know that things will change, and I know that the value that we bring to the table, it's there are people who recognize it, and it's the number is getting fewer and fewer about recognizing what the strengths women or other people who are different than the traditional law enforcement set can bring. So anyway, I came into law enforcement, and whether it's me being a woman or just as a brand new officer, was basically told, don't touch the radio, don't talk to anybody. You're not going to drive until you've got 2 years. That's a slight exaggeration, but not much. Um, but don't, like I said, don't talk to anybody, don't touch anything, don't say anybody, don't look at anybody in the eyes, kind of thing. And again,
Yeah.
just a slight exaggeration, but not much. And so I was like, is this really how my law enforcement career is gonna go? Like, I don't get to do anything, and so it was a bit of a challenge for sure. And it really shaped, in some respects, it really shaped who I am today. Because when I entered law enforcement, in 1992, I went through my own challenges through high school and university and all those things, especially being an out lesbian. And I mean, we weren't as widely accepted in 1992, 1988, 1984, when I entered high school, as we are today. And so when I went into law enforcement, I didn't know anybody up here in Milwaukee because I came from Illinois. And I first wanted to be known as a good person. That was first and foremost. Like, I'm loyal, I'm truthful, all of these things. So first and foremost, I want to be known as a good person. Secondarily, I want to be known as a good cop. And I worked twice as hard as anybody. I wasn't going to be outworked. I'll tell you that. And whatever else came after person and cop was down the road. So those two things mattered to me the most. And I think very early on, I worked incredibly hard to prove that I was both of those things. By being a good person, and you just have to show up and do the work, right? And you have to be honest, and you have to be willing to speak truths and to be true to yourself, to who you are, to the profession, and the things that you can offer to it. And then to be a good cop. And like I said, that's just putting in the work and making the right decisions and guiding people down the right paths and those types of things. So, yeah, I was rewarded very early in my career, 4 or 5 years on the job. And I was so fortunate to have incredible mentors, even at such an early age. People who taught me that it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes, but what do you do from those failures, or how do you learn from those mistakes, and how do you push forward? And people who said, you have to be true to you. And I know that you're going to ask me a question, and that's one of the things that I want to talk about at the very end. But so I was rewarded very early in my career and asked to be on a specialty car. At that time, the district that I was working at had a narcotics car. We specialized in narcotics and weapons and gang offenses. And so there was a group of us at the substation district that I worked at and the regular station. So 6, 7, 8 men and myself. But it was so much fun. I got to experience so many amazing things. My partners, which is funny because as a woman, I took on the traditional role of writing the reports, of making sure that all the books were up to date and so on and so forth. But I also got to do some really incredible things, work with some great guys, learned so much about policing and Fourth Amendment and all those types of things, which ultimately led to me going to the vice squad to work narcotics, to the warrant squad, or maybe it was the other way around, serving felony warrants, and then eventually getting promoted and so on and so forth. So just the effort that I put in, I think helped shape my career. And, the challenges that I faced and overcame, just like I made it through 100% of my bad days early in my career, and so that showed me that if I could face these challenges in 1992, I can face any challenge put in front of me if I apply myself and just buckle down and get to work.
Yeah. I there's a few things I want to touch on because I connect so much with the things that you say, but one of them is that you will never regret the effort that you put into something. You will, however, regret the lack of effort, right? And so when you said, first I wanted to be a good person, that was really important, that I led with integrity and I had my values and I was loyal and all those things that mattered to you. Secondly, I'm going to be really good at my job and no one is going to outwork me. And that work ethic that helped you to rise to the top. And I think that if we can frame it in this way of like, hey, like the effort is always worth it. Even if you fail, and you said that, you're like, I wasn't afraid to fail. You have to swing big in life and you are going to fall. That is going to happen. It's an inevitability. If you're taking chances and risks, you're always going to stumble and fall sometimes. It's the learning opportunities that you get from those failures. And I always put them in quotes because I don't necessarily think that I ever see something as an absolute failure. I think that there's so much learning and growth that comes out of our mistakes, or, maybe we don't get the opportunities that we're looking for, or whatever it is, we can get better. And that's the resiliency, right? Like that's how we get to push past. And then eventually you will achieve all those things if you keep going. Like that's the thing. You have to keep going, and you'll never regret the effort that it takes to get there, even though it's really hard. And I'm not saying don't give yourself grace. I'm not saying that I haven't been in fetal position sometimes being like, this is
sure.
so hard, like that happens. But you have to keep going. And I've told people this before, and I don't know if you have the same opinion, but I always had a chip on my shoulder. Like my drive came from the people who doubted me. And I had a lot of people who doubted me. I had a lot of family who were like, you're just going to end up just like, for me, in that my situation, it was, you're going to end up like your parents, you're not going to amount to anything. So, why even try? It was always this, like, you'll never be anything. And I always think I did have a chip on my shoulder of like, I'm going to prove everyone wrong. And I'm going to stand on top of that mountain with middle fingers to the sky and be like, look at me, And I don't think that having a chip on your shoulder is necessarily a bad thing as long as you use it for good. And I think we have to be able to differentiate that, because you could have a chip on your shoulder and be super negative and choose unhealthy things and, kind of go down that path. Or you can use that as an intrinsic motivator to achieve all the things that everyone said that you couldn't in the first place.
Yeah, that's so true. So true. And the biggest doubter that I ever had was me.
Mm.
And that was a hurdle that I had to overcome. Whether it was getting through school and not believing that I was smart enough to be successful, or athletics and not believing that I was talented enough to go to a Division I school, or whatever it was. Sometimes I even have a little bit of imposter syndrome being a chief, like, am I truly talented enough to be in this position? And I know that I am. I know intrinsically that I am. And, but, you still let those doubts creep in. And so nobody is a bigger doubter than me, and that's, part of the growth, and it's the evolution, and it's still something that I work at every single day to have that confidence.
I do think that we hold ourselves back a lot. I read a book, and I want to say it was The Untethered Soul, but don't quote me on this. But it talked about the inner roommate. Have you heard of this concept of the inner roommate?
I might have, yeah.
It's this idea that basically the thoughts in your head, you have to almost look at it as this like annoying roommate that is just like talking at you. And you have to almost talk back at it in a way that you would like an annoying roommate, like that's nagging you, being like, you're not good enough or whatever. You'd be like, please stop talking, right? Like that's not true. And kind of pushing that like out the door. And I have to do the same thing, and I have imposter syndrome all the time. So I really appreciate you having the vulnerability and like the humility to say that. And I think a lot of people who are listening can relate to that. We are our own worst critics. It is really hard for us to advocate for ourselves internally sometimes. And so I always try to think of it as the inner roommate, like just someone who's being annoying. That's like has no weight on my life, but easier said than done sometimes, for sure. You told me that you still love this career, that you still can't believe that you get the opportunity to do this every single day. What is the secret to that mindset? How are you able to create that positive mindset and the mindset of gratitude after 30 plus years in this job?
Yeah, I think it's abundance, really. And what the evolution of my career. Now, there days that I don't like coming to work. Of course there are. Some things I don't like doing? Of course there are. But I wake up every day and I get to do this job. It's an amazing profession. No 2 days are ever the same. I get to work with incredible people, people who brighten my life, who add value to this agency, to my life, through friendships, through their work, through everything that they do. And I look at my career as the opportunity to experience. Now, I did so many things when I was with Milwaukee, and I said that a little bit when we talked. Whether it was working in patrol or administration, or in the office of the chief, or being the crowd control commander, or just so many incredible things. And so if you look at all of those and the great things, the opportunities that I had to meet so many people, to travel to so many places, to interact with incredible individuals. That's how I look at every single day, with abundance and gratitude. And so when I choose to wake up and say, I get to do this, it's really about just continuing to focus on my growth, this agency's growth, making positive contributions to my life, the contributions that they make to my life, the positive contributions that I make to theirs, to this community, to this village. It's pretty incredible. So, and of course, you go through this evolution, and you have good days and you have bad days, but I still, 32 years later, can't believe that I get to do this job. And it is the greatest job ever in the world. And in spite of all of the pendulum of things that have happened in my career, the support for police, the lack of support for police, the defund, the fund, the, heroes from 9/11 to the villains of Ferguson and George Floyd and so on and so forth. All of that plays an impact and has a role in this job. And how can we, if we focus on the negative, that's all we'll see, right? A friend of mine wrote not too long ago, what you look for is what you'll find. So if you're looking for misery or conflict, or you're going to find it. Mm-hmm. If you're looking for joy and happiness and abundance, and you're going to find that too. And here's the really great thing, Paige, we get to choose. We get to wake up and we get to choose.
Yeah.
That's what I do every single day.
I am so happy that you said that, because I wrote that down before you said that it's a choice. And I think that we sometimes forget how much power we have over our own lives and our own circumstances. And what you just described is mental training. You are training your brain to look for more positive things. And you're right, there's evidence of both in the world. And you don't have to tell anyone in law enforcement that. You are going to see the worst of the worst, and you can see the best of the best, right? And so there's evidence of both in the world. But I love that you put it on to the individual, that it's a choice, and you have the ability to do that. Sometimes it takes a little bit of awareness, and whether you can have that self-assessment and awareness within yourself, or if you have someone who's in your life who's willing to call you out on it, that works too, but how can you start with that awareness of, am I, and I catch myself doing this too. I'm not perfect at all. And there have been times where I wake up and I'm like, oh, I have to go do this. And then I have to check myself and say, no, I get to go do this. Like, how lucky am I? And I think that the more you can catch yourself on those things, the more training you can have with gratitude, the more, and we call it the red car theory. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but try it one day. It's such a simple exercise. It's like, you never ever see a red car when you're driving. And then as soon as you start having awareness about red cars, they're everywhere. And you're like, I can't believe it. And so when you start looking for those positivities in your life, you're going to see so so many more that you didn't even know were there, and they were right there in plain sight to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
I know that you were really instrumental in the wellness program at your previous agency, and I, definitely want to dive into some of that. But when did wellness become a major focus for you, and why?
I don't know that I can necessarily pinpoint like a specific date, but I I went to university to study psychology, and I tell this story. I've guest spoken at a number of classes, and as the kids are getting younger, and I say kids, I'm not that old, but I say kids. So what I wanted to be, or my intent for going to school in abnormal psychology, because I wanted to be Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs, right? Like I wanted to be a forensic psychologist and interview the criminal mind. And well, like I said, it didn't work out, but I'm not that far from the path. But um, so like I said, I can't state a specific date, but having gone through a number of the things that I went through in Milwaukee, really started me down that path. And if I could just talk about a couple of things that really had an impact on my life.
Yeah.
The one of the very first ones, that was a wake up call to me. And this is a story that I'll never forget for as long as I live. And a friend of mine talk about it in just about every single presentation that we give. But we were working together in 1999. And in 1997, we had an officer shot and killed in the district that I was working in. And on New Year's Eve, which is a really big night for most urban law enforcement agencies, the experience of shots being fired in celebration or celebratory gunfire and those types of things. Well, that night, New Year's Eve, there had been a number of fires in the location where we were working. And so all of the officers were assigned to two-person cars. So she was a relatively new officer. I was working, and we had spent, normally on New Year's Eve, what happens is you try to find a location where you might be semi-protected from celebratory gunfire, unless you're necessarily called to an assignment. But we had squads that were stationed on arson scenes in the area where our officer had died 2 years prior. So there was no way that I was going to let them remain in that location unprotected. So we were patrolling, and we got called to a shooting. And believing that it may have been an opportunity for an ambush, my partner and I parked about 2 blocks away, and then walked in the scene from there. Got to the house. Took us a little bit to get in, and what we found in the house was, once we finally got in, was a 13-year-old girl. We had to go in the house, and there was blood everywhere and kids screaming. But what we found when we went into the house was a 13-year-old girl that had been shot. She had heard gunfire, went to the window to see what had happened, and where would be a safe location to get the kids that she was babysitting. Well, she took a round to the neck, and my partner took all of the kids out of the room where she was at, and I was tending to her until the fire department got there. And she ended up passing, and she passed while I was there. And that was, I'm surprised I got through that without crying, because normally Cassandra Turnage was her name. Anyway, so she's 13 years old, and I'm trying to find the place where she was shot. And she kept saying, "Tell my mom I love her." Mm. And then she passed. And that was she's 13 years old. She's babysitting these kids on New Year's Eve and wasn't even the target of this gunfire. And my partner and I tell that story because it was one of the most impactful homicides. We can sometimes disassociate homicides from us, or, put them in a box someplace in our brain. But that one just stayed with me, and it stayed with my partner. So I think that was one of the very first times that I recognized that I didn't deal with that trauma, and then compound it with all of the homicides that we went to, all of the traumatic events that we went to. Another, and while this isn't necessarily maybe as traumatic for some people, but when I was in the warrant squad, I had to shoot and kill a dog that was close to attacking me. And to be nicknamed DK, dog killer, when I was in the warrant squad, or to have little stuffed animals put in my mailbox, or I mean, I am an animal lover, and that it was horrible. That was the first one and only one animal that I had ever shot on the job, and to hear its cries and to know that I was responsible for that, and even though it was going to attack me, that was really, really hard. But when I came on in 1992, you didn't talk about those things. You didn't talk about how the things that you saw or did impacted you. And God forbid, and especially as a woman, don't ever admit that you've got anxiety or you were taking medication for, depression or mental health issues or whatever. I mean, the stigma was compounded in 1992, and especially for women. So, I mean, you just swallowed those things, and typically you swallow those things in the form of alcohol, or your feelings, or you joked about it. And, most cops have pretty, I don't know the word, but we got sick sense of humor sometimes. But, so you swallow all of that. And so I had all of this stuff that you just compartmentalize, or you put in suitcases, and you put it in a closet until one day you go to get something out of the closet, and then it just falls over because there's so much stuff in there, right? I mean, so those are the first couple pieces. There's a lot of other things that I went through, and especially when I was working in the internal affairs division, and I know that you brought that up, and I mentioned that too. But what I saw when I was working in the internal affairs division is sometimes things happen because people have this baggage, this trauma. So it isn't necessarily, bad people doing bad things. And I'm not going to say that there aren't cops that do that, because there are bad cops that do bad things. But there's also very good cops that make bad decisions. And it isn't necessarily a decision that they make because it's willful. They make decisions because, of what they've learned, what they've experienced, what they believe to be true, and trauma all plays a role. It's no different. Or, for example, a good officer who goes out and has a few too many, and then decides that they're going to drive, and whether or not they get stopped without hurting themselves or somebody else, or if it ends up in an accident, it's still a good person who made a poor decision to drive. And so, and especially as law enforcement officers, where drinking is such a widely accepted form of self-medication, right? So looking at how do we separate the behavior from the person, and recognizing that the person isn't the act, the person isn't the behavior, and recognizing also that the behavior may need to be addressed, but the person also needs to be addressed, because maybe it's a cry for help, or it's endemic of something larger that's happening in that person's life. And how do we investigate the action and aid the person?
I love that last part. Investigate the action and aid the person. You know what I find to be really interesting? I don't know if you've ever thought of this before, but you said earlier, so you were really interested in psychology and the why. You said that earlier. Like, I really wanted to get to like the root and understand the why. And I find it really interesting that everything that we've been through in our lives leads us and helps us in where we are today. I kind of feel like they're all little like stepping stones, or they're paving the path to where we're going. And when you're talking about this, I find that your education and your interest in knowing the why has helped you now as a leader to try to identify, when it comes to wellness, why are we seeing some of these things? Why are, we may be seeing use of force? Why are we seeing alcoholism? Why are we seeing some of these, health issues or behavioral issues? And how can we get in front of it? And I think that if we can ask ourselves more of the why and try to dissect some of these problems, then we'll be able to be more proactive and preventative. But if you don't know the why behind it, how are you ever going to be able to get in front of it? And so through your time of really kind of dissecting it, having this understanding of, some of those behaviors, having the mindset of like, how can we, separate the person from the behavior? How do you think we can now start to get in front of those things and be more proactive to provide that aid and those resources that these individuals need?
I think first and foremost, what we need to do, and especially as leaders, is we need to care. And, there's a quote that I really like that says, people don't care about how much you know until they know about how much you care. And I forget who said it, but it's so incredibly true. Like you can show up and be, disingenuous, or you can show up and be the caring person that you are. And I think the other thing that you need to do, so showing up is just half the battle. The other part is listening and truly caring and asking questions. When I started here in Shorewood, one of the things that I wanted to do is do check-ins. So I started with 4 check-ins a year with every single one of my people. And what I found interesting when I started that is that the only time they had ever been in the chief's office was when they were in trouble. And that was so strange to me, because I mean, that was a practice that I did even when I was in Milwaukee as a captain. Was, I checked in all the time with everybody, whether it's, most of it was informal, but going back and sitting in the sergeant's office or going to roll call. And that's something that I still practice here. I'm in the building, I'm going to roll calls because I think it's important for people to see the chief. I think it's important to have those informal conversations, or sit at the breakfast table for 10 minutes having morning coffee with the day shift, or, sending the late shift off and, hey, how was your night? And how's so-and-so, and those kinds of things. So, it's really just it's about showing up, because if you know your people, you'll notice when things are off. You'll notice when things may not be right in their world. And so showing up and then caring enough to ask the next question. Like, I'm so sorry, you seem off today. Do you want to share anything? Or, we have psychological services contract, making that referral to psych services if it's necessary. But, the other thing I talked about is normalizing talking about mental health wellness, because it's not sufficient any longer to just drown it out in alcohol or some other obsessive behavior. I mean, we have to confront it head on. And that means talking about it, and talking about the fact that we're all human beings. We all have flaws. We all have good days. We all have bad days. And how do we overcome those? And is it just a matter of getting right through, some practice, whether it's exercise or mindfulness or journaling or whatever the case may be, or is it something greater? But understanding also that we need help from time to time, and there's no shame in that. That rest is not weakness, and weakness isn't a character flaw, right? Or asking for help as a weakness isn't a character flaw. And I think that's having those conversations is first and foremost really incredible. You got to know your people, you got to know their patterns, you got to know their habits and those types of things.
Yeah. And one of the things that, kind of popped up for me while you were talking is that for people to know that you care, it takes action. It takes like effort to do that, And I had someone recently say to me that they were losing people. People were leaving the agency and they were like, why? Like, what's going on? Like, I feel like I care. I feel like I do these things. And someone was like, well, maybe they didn't know. Like, maybe they didn't actually know that you cared. So you could care, you could care a lot, but are you putting forth the action where other people truly know that you care? And that's that partnership that has to happen. And when, that chief told me that, one of their other members of leadership said that to them, they were like, oh, okay, like I can do better. There are things. And so I appreciate some of those tactical things that you said of like showing up to briefings, sharing a morning coffee with people, asking questions, having interactions that are outside of disciplinary action, so that they know that you're around and that you are a human too, and that you are talking about these things too. So I really appreciate you saying that. And I agree with you. I think that the more we can talk about it, the more normal it is, then not only the more like people will reach for it, but I also think the message starts to become that you don't have to be broken to care about wellness, and the idea is that we hope that we can get in front of these things before there's something major, like how can this be viewed as like a normal thing that you do, just like, and I'm going to say it, you guys, everyone should be going to the dentist twice a year. And I know no one does that, but, or like flossing, right? It's like these things that are normal, like, and I'll just say it like super, super like third grade understanding, right? You brush your teeth a couple times a day, right? Usually like morning, evening. Some people brush more often, but I would say most people brush their teeth 2 times a day. You're not brushing your teeth because you have a cavity or your teeth are falling out. You're brushing it to prevent those things from happening. And it's just normal, right? And so how can we start to see all facets of wellness to be that way of like, hey, like I'm going to go talk to someone, not because like I'm having a mental breakdown, but because I don't want to get there. I want to, get in front of it. Or, hey, I'm going to focus on my physical fitness, not because I feel like I've let myself go, but because I don't want to get to a point where I'm injured or I feel like I've gained more weight than I would like, or whatever that is. So I think the more we have conversations and the message becomes, hey, this is just a part of what we do on a consistent basis as preventative. And then of course, if there is something major that happens, we also got you there. We have the resources that are a little bit more reactive too. So thank you for everything
You're
that you
welcome.
said. My final question is for the younger generation. And I agree with what you said earlier. They are kids to me too. I saw a tattoo. I was working at an academy and I saw a tattoo that said 2001. And I was like, oh no. And I realized in that moment that they probably think that I'm just like the old lady walking in because they're so young. But the reality is that these younger men and women will be the future leaders of the organizations that they work within. So what words of wisdom would you share with them? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier in your career or something that really helped you along the way.
Yeah, what comes to my mind, and I've been thinking about this ever since you laid that out to me. But peer pressure is powerful. It is incredibly powerful, and it can be used as a significant motivator. And this goes back to your doubters, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to doubt me. That's a form of peer pressure because I'm going to work my ass off to be what you say I can't. But peer pressure can also be incredibly toxic. And I fell victim to peer pressure early in my career. And that's where, the excessive use of alcohol came into play and, trying to be one of the guys and to be a good cop meant that I had to be one of the guys and rough and tumble and, not afraid to get into fights and mix it up with people. And, that's what I thought meant being a good cop was. And of course there are, being righteous and justified in legal with legal standing and the things that you're doing. But, we drank a lot, early in my career. And as a child of an alcoholic, I knew the path that could take me down, and other addictive qualities in my family and extended family, and I didn't really care, but that's not who I am. Of course it was fun when you're doing it, but you don't think about things long term, and so we get a little short sighted. And I really changed who I was. And this goes contradictory to what I said. I wanted to be a good person, and then I wanted to be a good cop. And the truth of it is, Paige, I wasn't. I mean, you weren't going to outwork me early in my career, and even today. But I changed who I was and what I believed, because I wanted to be one of the guys that I wanted to go out and I wanted to have fun. And I surrounded myself with people who were just cops. I ate, drank, slept, whatever, had romantic partners. Everybody was a cop. And that's all I knew. So I didn't have any diversified interests in my life. And I thought that's who I needed to be to be a good cop. And it's so far from the truth. And so, being able to right myself and recognize that I'm one of one, and I don't need to change who I am to be what I am today, and to be true to myself. In fact, I have a compass tattooed on my body, and it's a reminder to me that I'm my own north. And so peer pressure, if you allow it, can be a powerful motivator, or it can be such a detriment to you as a person and to your career. It can completely derail you if you let it. But we have to be strong enough. We have to be strong enough in our beliefs, and we have to be strong enough in our person and our confidence to overcome some of those assimilation challenges that we face in law enforcement. And of course, there are many positive things about assimilating in law enforcement, the family and the team and those types of things. But we just need to be careful, because at the end of the day, what really matters is how you look at yourself and how you view yourself every day in the mirror, but the legacy ultimately that you're going to leave as a person, as an individual, and in your law enforcement career. And I tell my people this all the time. Like, culture doesn't start and end with me. Every single one of us are responsible for culture. We're responsible for morale. And like I said, the legacy that we leave is representative of us as an individual, as this agency, and as the profession in law enforcement. And that matters to me. And so it took me a long time to get there, but I wish somebody had told me that, but it's helped me grow and helped me become the person that I am today. But legacy matters, and
wow.
That would be my advice.
Thank you. I loved those words of wisdom. I have never had anyone say it. I love that you said that you are one of one and that you are your own north. How powerful is that? And honestly, this conversation has reminded me of why I do what I do and that I get to do this. So thank you so much for your time and coming on with me today. I genuinely appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you for this opportunity.
Of course.